And yet, even white nationalism could get onto television. Even the left. I mean, there has been none. We don't even need to do a thought experiment here because we have seen it actually happen. Yeah. There is plenty of room for all this garbage.
Would it be better to do a thought experiment than talk about what actually happened? Because but even that would be unfair.
Both the thought experiment and the reality belie that point.
Well, there's a different thought experiment.
This is kind of what we were arguing about yesterday, and I agree with you, Sam. There's no rule that the right and the left have to be treated the same. So the slippery slope arguments, if you're going to say, oh, you're boycotting the left, the right, you're censoring the right, therefore that can be done back to the left, it just doesn't hold any water.
Well, no, it can be done to the left.
Yeah, but it will be done independently of whether or not it's happening to the right.
I also think that, I mean, at least in this context, I don't know what the argument was yesterday.
This wasn't the argument.
Well, it's
like, wait, I don't want to get into the argument from yesterday. So, with all due respect, I want to get to this Tucker Carlson thing because Tucker Carlson's an ass, and I want to encourage people to speak to his advertisers and have him dumped.
And finally, Hitler confesses, he says, only one thing could have broken our movement. If the adversary had understood its principle and from the first day had smashed with the most extreme brutality the nucleus of our new movement, who could know better than he?
The creator in question used racial and homophobic slurs as insults in a conversation shared online. As a result, that page has been removed from Patreon. Naturally, I, a crusader against political correctness, thought, of course, but you're gonna have to be a little bit more specific than that. But I mean, it probably is true. I probably have used the naughty words. Vladimir Putin, I am not autistic, you retard. Can you find better countries than English-speaking countries? America was a white majority country, and it's people who are obsessed with mass immigration from the third world who are turning it into a non-white majority country, and that is something that's really happening. What kind of system is producing them? And I tell you what, Lacey, it is a fucking feminist system that's doing this! Oh. Well, great job trivializing minority slurs. You nigger spick fag chink kike retard. Just can't be bothered to deal with people who treat me like this. It's really annoying. Like, you are acting like a bunch of niggers, just so you know. You act like white niggers. Exactly how you describe black people acting is the impression I get dealing with the alt-right. Look, you carry on, but don't expect me to then have a debate with one of your faggots.
There's a good old-fashioned word for people like this. We call them suckers. And there are other people. People who stay up nights figuring out how to take away what they've got. Yeah, Mike's got something, all right. He's got America. But there are guys who stay up nights figuring out how to take that away from him.
I happen to know the facts. Now, friends, I'm just an average American. But I'm an American, and some of the things I see in this country of ours make my blood boil. I see people with foreign money. I see Negroes holding jobs that belong to me and you. Now, I ask you, if we allow this thing to go on, what's going to become of us real Americans?
I've heard this kind of talk before, but I never expected to hear it in America.
This fellow seems to know what he's talking about.
What are we real Americans going to do about it? You'll find it right here in this little pamphlet. The truth about Negroes and foreigners. The truth about the Catholic Church.
Do you believe in that kind of talk?
I don't know, makes pretty good sense to me.
And I tell you, friends, we'll never be able to call this country our own until it's a country without. Without what? Yeah, without what? Without Negroes. Without alien foreigners. without Catholics, without Freemasons. You know these people.
What's wrong with the Masons? I'm a Mason. Hey, that fellow's talking about me.
And that makes a difference, doesn't it?
These are your enemies. These are the people who are trying to take over our country. Now you know them. You know what they stand for. And it's up to you and me to fight them. Fight them and destroy them before they destroy us. Thank you.
Before he said Masons, you were ready to agree with him.
Well, yes, but he was talking about, what about those other people?
But in this country, we have no other people. We are American people.
What about you? You aren't American, are you?
I was born in Hungary, but now I am an American citizen. And I have seen what this kind of talk can do. I saw it in Berlin.
What were you doing there?
I was a professor at the university. I heard the same words we have heard today. But I was a fool then. I thought Nazis were crazy people, stupid fanatics. But unfortunately, it was not so. You see, they knew that they were not strong enough to conquer a unified country. So they split Germany into small groups. They used prejudice as a practical weapon to cripple the nation. Of course, that was not easy to do. They had to work hard to do it. You see, we human beings are not born with prejudices. Always they are made for us. Made by someone who wants something. Remember that when you hear this kind of talk. Somebody is going to get something out of it. And it isn't going to be you.
So, let me walk you through this, because there's a lot of information here. And to be fair to Patreon, it's not just Patreon. It's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's the rest of them. There has been a purge, and it's not just of far-right figures. When you look at all these different social media sites, it is a variety of different ideologies that have effectively been purged. So in the case of Patreon, here's what we know. So the Proud Boys, which was Gavin McInnes's group, they had their page pulled down. Milo Yiannopoulos, who everybody knows who he is, he's the provocateur on the right, and he had put up a page, I believe in one day, it got pulled down. Now, when they were asked, hey, why was Milo pulled down? He's only up there a day. Like, what did he do in that time frame for you to say, I'm going to pull it down? They said, well, he was associated with the Proud Boys, and the Proud Boys are a violent extremist group, therefore, that's why we're going to pull him down. Now, Milo, he was associated with them, but he disavowed them, actually. And but he was still pulled down for that anyway. So listen, now I want to be clear. I'm in no way, shape, or form defending any of these individuals in terms of their ideology and their beliefs. And I think that there are totally fair criticisms of most of these people that I'm going to lay out for you in this segment. But we do need to make a distinction, which is, so what exactly are the rules?
Hey guys, in this two-part video, we are going to be talking about deplatforming versus free speech absolutism. Now, that's a very simplified version of the argument. We're going to be covering a lot more than just that dynamic, because there's a lot of facets to this whole concept of is deplatforming far-right fucking lying fascists a slippery slope to people on the left using facts and reality and maybe getting opinions wrong here and there? Is it a slippery slope to having that deplatform? And there, like I said, there are a lot of facets to this argument. And so I wanted to start sort of by telling you the process by which I decided to make this fucking video, right? It's been something that's on my mind because while Punks for Progress is not like currently like asking for any money, and none of us are reliant on any money from this. We all do this in our free time right now. But it's still a real issue because I like doing it. and we cover very controversial topics purposefully, and that could hurt us if this slippery slope argument is true. And so I've been keen to, listen to the different arguments on it. And recently Kyle Kulinski did a video where he really declared this free speech absolutism thing, which I'd heard him say before. And I really want to address that. So that's how it started. Was he posted a video where he was talking about deplatforming in his position on free speech absolutism, and that was the start. And then I realized that there was more voices I wanted to hear. I had other questions, and as I dived into starting to make the video, and really the fucking person I wanted to talk to was Michael Brooks. I was really curious what his take on some of my thoughts were, and so I said fuck it, and I called him on the majority board, Sam Cedars majority board, and to my good fortune, him and the crew hung with me for like a half hour. So that's going to make the bulk of the first video. But, so I'm like, great, now I'm off and running. I had this really fantastic discussion with the entire MR crew, got a hell yeah or two out of Jamie. And, and then I see after that Kyle goes on Hassan Piker's podcast, and they really got into this subject and really got into all the different arguments from this sort of progressive point about why deplatforming is bad in general. And so it was great. It was like, it gave me all the things that we sort of didn't cover in the conversation with Michael, because we really went at it from a macro perspective, which was really awesome. Like, I didn't debate with the MR crew. We really fleshed out the topic, and it's kind of wonky and it's long, but that's the major part of this first part video. But in the second one, it's not a macro perspective on why you shouldn't deplatform. And I think it's why I'll be able to do a fairly good job of pointing out the sort of holes in the progressive argument in general in relation to deplatforming. So before we really get into it, I want to sort of make a couple caveats or distinctions to sort of frame the discussion, things that I think are just, hopefully we can all sort of agree on, right? Like one, there is a very big difference between advertisers pulling out of pulling out on Tucker Carlson or Laura Ingraham or something like that, and really hurting their ability to get their message out to other people. That's different than sort of piling on a, report button, or, right-wingers piling on a left-wing video, or left-wingers doing vice versa, right? Because that's people saying, I don't want to spend my money on something anymore that I don't agree with, which under this capitalist scumbag system not only do they have the right to make that choice, there's a lot of power behind that choice too. So that's one form of deplatforming, and I just think it is very different than, however you feel about either one, it's still different than just blatantly trying to, as a group mob, bring down someone like Sargon, or which is what happened. Eventually he pissed off the alt-right by trying to be more racist than them, and they got pissed and piled on him and got his shit removed and got him deplatformed. So I just think that's different than an advertiser making a choice that they have every right to make. And also, I want to make the distinction about what is platforming. Okay, so like Patreon, while you can post content to Patreon, it is primarily a funding source. Okay, it's not really a platform. So being removed from Patreon is not being deplatformed, and is most assuredly not being censored, because you can still go on other platforms and spew your bullshit. Just Patreon isn't going to let you use their business to profit off of your bullshit. And then lastly, I think I want to, there's one more point I want to make, and I have some video to sort of illustrate it, but while there's similarities and differences, of course, I think that looking at the online community, or the YouTube community, or this stuff, is very similar. It is the 2018 version of the town square. right? Where you get your soapbox, you get out and you say your thing, right? And we've been seeing the traditional versions of that on the street over the last couple of years, you know, which it waned much over the last year because of proper anti-fascist counter-demonstration. But what we saw from the fascists getting out the street is sort of the traditional thing that you see in the Don't Be a Sucker video. You know, the Nazi out on the street trying to sell blatant bigotry as patriotism and not what it truly is, which is just fascist scapegoating. And but again, this online community is very similar. Now, they're different. Fundamentally, the two are the same concept. This is how do we deal with the community, as a community, with people coming out and perverting the marketplace of ideas and the notions of free speech to sell lies that ultimately bolster an oppressive fascist ideology. And how do, you know, on the street we go, okay, well, we come out in huge numbers and we demonstrate against them. I mean, you know, cops and Klan hand in hand and all the things that are true and right and proper that we would yell at these fascists. But you can't do that. It's a very different medium or atmosphere online, right? You can't just 2,000 people show up on a street corner online. So it's, well, again, while the two are fundamentally the same principle, I do feel like it's important to point out that there are distinctions between the two and to flesh out that sort of nuance. And I think that will be done incrementally throughout the two-part series. So this is part one, and we're going to get into, first, real quick before we get into the Sam Cedar stuff, Kyle Kulinski had this to say, and I want to address it before we get into the meat of the video. So cool. We'll be right back.
So what exactly are the rules? Because if the ultimate point is, all right, listen, we just don't like them because they're insane, because of their insane politics, is that really a standard that we want to set? Like, oh, we don't like you because of your politics and we're going to pull you down? Because I got news for you. That's going to backfire on every single one of us. So, again, let me walk you through it. In the case of the Proud Boys, listen, it is true. I've seen the videos of the Proud Boys that have concerned the fuck out of me. Now, they swear up and down, you know, Gavin McInnes swears it, and fucking Anthony Cumia was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he swears up and down, like, no, it started as a joke, and it's not serious, and blah, 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 blah. I've seen the videos of the Proud Boys, and I do think it's an inescapable conclusion that Gavin McInnes has literally advocated for direct violence. Now, I'm a free speech absolutist, but direct threats of violence are one thing that doesn't even pass the free speech absolutist test. In other words, nobody of sane mind is going to say, yeah, you're allowed to directly advocate for specific violence and get away with it.
Okay, so first off, I'd like to address Kyle's use of ableist language. He uses it incessantly throughout all his content. Most progressive media uses it incessantly throughout their content, and it's a problem. You know, Kyle in particular, though, is one of these people who is under the impression that calling men bitches is acceptable. Of course, he would never, ever call a woman that. He understands the importance of not doing that. But, and I've actually argued this with a number of progressives, and the response I usually get is that it means something different now. So apparently in their progressive white male privilege, they've made that decision. I don't agree with it. I think it's troublesome, and I think that there's a lot of women out there who probably wouldn't appreciate that and weren't in on the meeting when the definition of that word was changed. So anyway, Kyle's troublesome use of language aside, the reason I wanted to play that clip is because it proves that Kyle is, in no uncertain terms, not a free speech absolutist. For starters, I would argue that free speech absolutism is a farce. It doesn't exist. And it's most assuredly not backed by the Constitution, whether you care about that kind of shit or not. But he says in the video that promoting violence doesn't meet the free speech absolutist criteria. And I'm sorry, Kyle, I got news for you. You're wrong. It absolutely does meet the criteria, because the concept is absolutism. That means, yeah, getting on any format you want and saying go out and fuck people up and kill them and choke a tranny and shit like Gavin Guinness has said is acceptable, because that's free speech absolutism. Unless you're calling it free speech absolutism with various caveats, which you're not a free speech absolutist. And if you can see a glimpse into at least some instances where free speech absolutism is unacceptable, then maybe you can start to glimpse to see other places where free speech absolutism is not acceptable. So, okay, having covered that and given Kyle more shit than I actually would like to, because I frankly do have a lot of respect for Kyle. I think he's incredibly intelligent, and in terms of understanding Washington politics and the day-to-day manifestations of Washington, he usually has really, really great insight, and he's one of the reasons, which is one of the reasons why I watch people like him and Cenk Uygur. But I tend to have issues with some of their narratives, like what I just described. It sucks to have to sit through that shit when you just want to hear him talk about Washington, but he's got to call men bitches and talk about how people are crazy and insane. Who aren't, which is totally throwing people who have mental health issues under the bus. And it's just like, can you just talk about why Trump's an idiot or whatever it is, or what, Chuck Schumer said today instead?
You're calling from a 775 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Reverend Aaron from Punks for Progress.
Hey, what's going on?
Not a whole lot. I wanted to talk to you. I'm so glad that you're actually hosting, Michael.
Oh.
Because I want to talk about deplatforming a little bit.
Okay.
Because I got to hang up with this issue.
Okay.
So I should say I don't have a real, strong stance on it either way, although I am leaning more towards deplatforming of fascism being a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to kind of, before we get into it, point out that there's a difference between what me and my comrades and others did over the last year or two in Berkeley in organizing counter demonstrations against like Ben Shapiro and Milo's so-called Free Speech Week. I don't see those as the same thing, and they get lumped into the deplatforming argument a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you can elaborate, but I think protest is part of the same process of free speech, which I actually believe in pretty strongly. So I agree with you.
Excellent. So I'm glad we sort of established that.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other side of it, so Kyle Kulinski just recently put up a video where he's really adamant about the sort of slippery slope argument of deplatforming fascism, ultimately hurting us, right?
Yep.
And I'm open to this argument. Now, I have a small platform. We don't ask for money. My income is not reliant on it, so I don't have as much, flesh in the game as people like you or Kyle do, okay?
Right.
But I haven't seen the evidence yet. So Kyle cites It's Going Down, which is a fantastic media outlet if people want to check out true anarchist critique and perspective. They're amazing. It's just Going Down.
I listen to them all the time.
Pulled down. Yeah, they're incredible. And they've even done stuff for our platform, and they're just amazing for the community. And they were piled on, I don't know, year and a half or so ago by alt-righters because they were doing such a great job of supporting Antifa, and they got pulled down off Patreon. Now, I don't know if they've been reestablished or not, but this is the example that Kyle uses as the slippery slope if we're going to be bringing down, Sargon and, InfoWars and all these other people. And I don't see that connection. And I know that you are definitely very hesitant and skeptical of any type of deplatforming and So I really, and most of the time that you've brought it up on the show, Michael, you're kind of like, look, this is kind of how I see it. I don't want to get into it, bam, and then you're kind of out. And I'm interested in.
I don't really want to get into it, bam. I'm out. Okay. All right. Well, I do have two points I'll make on this, but first, I genuinely want to ask you. I mean, because I feel like it's. How do you not see the connection there? Right? Like to me, the connection is really linear. I can answer that pretty easily because it's linear. You know. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, the premise for why in this situation it's going down would have had their issue is a dishonest premise. It wasn't based on their actual activity and things that they were espousing. It was that so many right wingers had piled on and lied about their messaging.
I'm not making. I'm not making a moral. I know. But let me just take it here for a second, right? So, sure. I am not ever going to trust Patreon or Twitter or any of these platforms, and some of them might have better organizational cultures than others. So whatever, we can make some distinctions potentially, but I am not for a second going to trust the nuance and disaggregating abilities of any of these companies to make the distinction you're talking about. So stipulate that I agree with you as a moral claim, though, Sargon and It's Going Down are totally different moral propositions. But the process by which a skittish company that wants to avoid controversy and will make a business decision to avoid it, sure. And its broader implications on these crowd-funded platforms, it's a very direct link there. So turnabout is going to be fair play. So that's what I mean. I'm not making any type of actual.
Right. No, I completely.
There's no actual equivalency. I'm talking about these companies and how they operate.
So if I understand you correctly, it's you're saying, okay, people like Sargon and Lauren Southern and these other people who've been deplatformed for really gross behavior.
Particularly
is bad for their business model.
Right.
Hello, it's Lauren Southern here with Rebel, and I just got in a huge confrontation with the slut walk, which we are following right now. Essentially, I held a sign that said, "We are not living in a rape culture in the West."
No means no! No means no! No means no!
You are attacking our cameraman. Yeah.
Nah, he was the one who touched me first.
Excuse me. Oh, come on. So how do you believe your outfit is going to stop perpetuating rape culture?
It's my body, it's my choice. I can wear what I want. And this is exemplifying how it's a crime scene. Like wearing the caution tape that they would normally put around a physical crime scene when it's not regarding a person, but regarding me, it's regarding people, it's not considered a crime scene. That's up. It should be. It's a violation of a person's rights.
So, is this stopping rapes?
Any stats to back up anything that you've said this afternoon?
Absolutely.
You said that rapists go to jail. Can you give me a stat to back that up based on the number of rapes that are reported, the number of rapes that get taken to the cops, the number of rapes that get prosecuted? Could you give me some stats to back up your pseudo-reporting here?
Well, first of all, out of the amount of rapes that happen, out of 100,000 people, 1.7 of Canadians actually, that's just reporting rapes. So
yeah, you know that less than 10% of rapes are actually reported.
Okay, where's that?
To the cops.
Where's that?
It's from all of the women's organizations. You can look it up online. You can find it through the socialized organizations that study rape. I participate with an organization that works as a rape crisis center. We base that on the number of calls. The police know based on the unofficial reports, the third-party reporting, and the direct reports. This is not a secret that about 10% of rapes are reported.
I was just curious as to what her sign meant. That's all.
If you want to know what my sign means that this is not a rape culture, because rapists go to prison here. Rapists are actually hated here. Rapists are fired from their jobs. Men who make rape jokes are fired from their jobs. Go to Africa and you will see a real rape culture.
Yeah. Who's talking about it?
The whole point of the walk is to protest rape culture.
There's a group of women that were here and they're wishing to withdraw consent to use the footage that you had, I guess, gotten. So can you please make sure that is done and make sure that any of the stuff that they have.
We may or we may not use the footage. It is a public area, so we do have legal rights to use the footage.
But you like interviewed them specifically, right? So like
yes, and they gave us consent to interview them.
Well, now they're withdrawing it, so
that's not how it works, but
which is interesting given the event that you're at, right? Like, that's a little bit contradictory.
I mean, it's a little bit contradictory.
Well,
I totally say it. That's not how it works.
Well,
you can't just withdraw consent the next, like.
Well, that's interesting.
Why is that interesting?
It's just, I don't know.
No. Tell me.
Like a rally for like rapists, like, you know, consent and like withdrawing consent, saying like no means no. They're saying no, and you're saying that like.
Okay, so.
I mean, we want them brought down because we see that they have a real-time influence on a lot of ignorant minds that end up electing, you know, a big giant orange Cheeto, right? And so it has real-time effects in the world. So that's why I'm into deplatforming, because it terrifies me that their message gets out to people.
Yeah, so here are my other. Let me just and then I'll just throw it out before, because I'll answer what you're saying, and then everybody will jump in on this, because I know there's a lot of thoughts on this.
Sure.
So, and part of it, I just want to hear what everybody has to say one at a time, because it's important, and I don't know all the answers, obviously, and I want to learn. But there's my broader. Okay, so the broader thing, and this is let's like kind of put it into three buckets. So my first one is just the business of these platforms and what you're the tendencies you're creating. So as an example, one conversation I had many years ago, but it was a really smart sort of distinction, and this is much less serious, but it was like the whole college, like, and this was actually a left-wing critique of comedians complaining about colleges. And the point was, though, is like, it isn't that there's like leftist or subversive comedy getting sponsored by college campuses. It's that all of these campus activity committees, as one might expect from the type of student that would want to be in a campus activity community, no offense, but you know what I'm saying, is to book performers that aren't going to offend anybody and aren't going to do anything that might disrupt anybody's sensibility. And I think that potentially could be the trend line on some of these platforms. And I do think that if, you know, controversy is your concern, and again, I'm thinking about profit-making companies that are not making obvious moral and political distinctions, that is going to have implications for not only fascists, but also socialists and anarchists, okay? So that's like the business concern. The other concerns I have are, I think that there is sometimes a culture on the left that has gone so quickly to that position versus actually like winning fights, whether they're, you know, figurative, maybe even literal, but I'm focusing on figurative. So as an example, a couple years ago, Doug Lane tells this story. His son at University of Oregon, they did a really important demonstration at a meeting of administrators to protest tuition hikes. It's like one of the most important things students could protest about. And the administration cracked down hard. Like, we're going to kick you out of school type of hard, right? Now, their response was, to a lot of the organizers, their response was not to, you know, call the press, dig in their heels, you know, like not only are we right about this issue, now we're literally getting threatened to have our lives seriously materially harmed for exercising our rights. Some not insignificant number of people pivoted to, well, there are these like anti-abortion protesters who don't get in trouble for their protests on campus, and if we're going to get in trouble, they should get in trouble. Like, disaster, right? Like, the administration's going, sure, we would be happy to you know, police and monitor and control as many students as possible, right? And again, obviously, I'm trusting people in the audience to understand, you know, and it's annoying that I even have to say this, but I know that there's always like the, you know, people who are like intentionally not going to understand things or are literalists. This obviously is not an embrace of anti-choice politics in any way, shape, or form. It was to say that pivot is a big problem, to not go on like, wait a second, we're staying exactly on this issue and you're not going to suppress us, to, well, why aren't these other students getting into trouble? like this kind of like tattletale self-policing thing. And I think that is a big.
It's like why didn't the police shoot the white woman with the rock?
We don't want the police to shoot anybody. Precisely. That's the liberatory argument.
And it was wrong that they shot the black person in the first place. So don't distract us with this argument of the white woman with the rock.
No. Put the rock down. Put it down.
So nobody fearing for their life out here, huh? Interesting. Maybe if she was black and sitting on the floor, or maybe if she was black and holding a cell phone, or wearing a hoodie, or stopping a mass shooter, or running from a mass shooter, or you get the very clear and very obvious, well, to most, picture. This video of a Florida woman threatening police with a huge rock went viral this weekend, with many sane people asking the obvious question, where is this restraint when melanin is involved? Time and time again, we see police show that they do, in fact, have the training needed to de-escalate a situation and refrain from the shoot first, ask questions later way of handling situations. But this treatment seems to be reserved for one portion of the population. Even when white people are shooting up the place, or even shooting at cops, they're still taken into custody, alive. But when that person happens to be black, all of the patience and de-escalation tactics we see on display in this video are shelved. But, I mean, come on, we're told that all black people have to do is comply, right? Oh, you remember this?
That's it, bruh. Oh, come on, bro.
As soon as the video from the woman in Florida came across my timeline, my mind was immediately taken back to this game of Simon Says that led to the black man getting tased in the back despite doing everything in his power to follow these asinine orders. Yet here we have a woman acting manic, refusing to cooperate, threatening, and then throwing a rock at police officers. But she lives to tell the tale? And here's the thing, before you go and waste your mum's Wi-Fi trying to twist this narrative, I applaud these officers. I applaud their restraint. I applaud the fact that they were able to de-escalate the situation without anyone being seriously hurt. All I'm asking, and I'm sure this is echoed by many across the country, why are black people not afforded the same opportunity? Why do people jump through hoops to justify what is clearly a double standard? I kid you not, true story. Upon researching a response to this story, I found someone making the case that this woman posed no threat to officers because the brick, yes the brick, that concrete thing in her hand that can do damage, posed no real threat, but a black man sitting down with his hands on his knees, well, he needs immediate and severe apprehension, right? Is it so unreasonable to ask that police also adopt this method of policing when dealing with non-white people? Is it really? Because while I do feel that police need more training, this feared for their life narrative is one that's outside of police control. That's a societal issue that we must alter, because people are far too willing to accept this justification whenever an unarmed black person with a cell phone is shot, but yet just walk on by when an incident like this, where officers do have reason to fear for their safety, do their job the way they're supposed to. Equal treatment under the law. It's got a nice ring to it, don't you think?
Well, there is totally, by the way, there's absolutely a tendency I could see in certain sectors of criminal justice reform where they'll say, like, you know what, you're totally right about this. There are these really unfair racial and structural disparities, and our answer is going to be, we're going to incarcerate even more people to even out the stats. Not, we're going to get rid of this system that is horrible, full stop, and obviously disproportionately affects people of color. Exactly. So I think that's a very, that's a really big problem. I had one other point, but I guess I'll just sort of leave it there. I think, and I guess it's sort of attached to the third point, is I do think at times, I definitely think that there are some people. Okay, I think let me make a distinction. I think Milo, because Milo is, as far as I understand it, was specifically promising to dox and expose people who were transgender on his tour in a way that could jeopardize their well-being. Okay, Milo was threatening to expose undocumented students. I didn't remember what it was. I just knew that with Milo, there's a totally different dynamic than just speech. So stopping that is a fundamentally different thing because you're protecting somebody's well-being, right? So that takes on a completely different equation. Ben Shapiro being a little smug asshole at your campus, I would say if Ben Shapiro had been primarily ignored or people had gone to his appearances and just been cool, calm, and collected and mocked him, I don't think he would have half the career he has.
I mean, that's what happens in most of the times that he appears in places, though. Like, there's all these stories of they were expecting trouble at this speech. Somebody made a huge thread about this, and it turned out like no, nothing happened.
Well, not actual trouble, but well, look, there's enough material he's been given for 1 million montages to feed his brand. So on just
and
a
I
very
question
practical,
where a lot of that comes from, because I'll tell you, Michael, I helped organize one of the main demonstrations against him at Berkeley.
Right.
And what went down there was the positive you were just describing.
Okay.
And anyone that got there and was complete, would do the things that we would be embarrassed or shudder from understand could be used against us would have been squashed instantly. And
so then that's just his team.
It really was
creating
great
propaganda
and speeches and people from the old civil rights movement that were talking.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's his team creating propaganda. Then I do think honestly in some of these.
So I guess in the end, man, I'm open to see the reality and the possibility that there could be the slippery slope with deplatform. I think what I'm asserting at this point is I just haven't seen it yet. And again, so with the It's Going Down versus alt-right model, It's Going Down didn't do things that then got the attention of Patreon.
Haven't Antifada accounts been removed from Patreon? I mean, I think isn't that
Antifa?
Excuse me.
Yeah, and listen,
I hope
that's
the
problem.
No, I hope not too. I don't want to put that out to the universe.
Back to this gets to your argument about not trusting the business that's running this stuff, because the distinction being, I'm hoping, I guess, which is maybe kind of misguided, that they would understand. Okay, look. You brought down It's Going Down because of lies. You brought down Sargon because of things he actually did.
I think
that there's something in that argument.
I don't think so. I think you're not going to. I would never depend on a Silicon Valley company making adjudications like that, and I think ever.
Well, no, I think what I'm depending on is I'm not seeing any reason I should stop supporting the deplatforming of fascism. I'm not seeing that.
I mean, look, all I'm saying is that
if I see that
that's the new game
to a leftist side, it would be different.
You know what the real play might end up being is that we are going to, on some of these platforms that aren't totally monopolized, there might end up being a left-wing Patreon and a fascist Patreon, and we're going to have to migrate into these different business models.
They already have Hatreon, don't they?
I think so.
Yeah, but those things are always going to run into trouble with payment providers and stuff.
Well,
you fundamentally need to run on
some
sort of infrastructure.
Well, that's actually right, and I think that's maybe right. That's a more... What I'm saying, though, is if you have two different platforms that say, like, okay, we are providing for different types of politics... Then and that's also scary too, frankly. But I think like a payment platform, because of the way their business is run, is going to be more likely to basically be saying like they stopped processing Gavin McInnes stuff because they're scared that there's even a 1% chance that there's organized criminal activity going on. That's not because of somebody giving an interview. So that already becomes a completely different metric that you're measuring by. So, but as long as these things are in the hands of like a Patreon, no, I don't think it's a smart strategy.
This is the problem. This is why I always try to move this conversation onto monopoly, because I don't think you can win on actually having this conversation outside of it. Because if there was no monopoly, I would take my business to a left-wing platform that balances this correctly, right? Like it ices out the fascists and is favorable to left-wingers. I think I could run a Patreon like that fairly well now if you wanted to, but I'm not in charge of Patreon. And the other thing people need to realize with Patreon and the Sargon stuff is they realize and they're conscious about the fact that they're not just monetizing the content that gets put on Patreon, right? Somebody could subscribe to Literary Hangover if they just liked what I do on this show. They would never even have to listen to the...
Well, they said that in their statement.
Right, and that's...
They basically said, like, look, we check out especially what our top performers do on different platforms.
And that was always going to happen, and that's going to be an increasing site of risk. And I mean, the problem is, I think that continuing to encouraging these things will lead like left-wing things get cut too.
100%.
I think that's why the right wing likes to play well, if you're going to let us in, then or if you're going to let them in, then you have to let us in. And if you're going to let us out, we're going to make a hassle out of this XXX
and
example.
There's always going to be, for the foreseeable future, as we work to change it, there's going to be a structural advantage on the right in those dynamics.
Yeah, and I think... I think I understand what he's saying about now. Like, I think Sargon and Milo, like, yeah, fuck them. But I am genuinely, like, I don't want to pour any more gas on the fire as far as that goes.
I don't think it's a wise strategy. And I even think, whatever. I think we can also, frankly, if you want to, you can also parse. I think Milo is in some ways a very easy one to parse, even in his tours, because he was specifically talking about doing an actionable thing to students, as far as I understand. And it already becomes a totally different thing than, frankly, even somebody like Sargon. The guy's a fucking jackass. Take him on. Use them as an example to undermine the brand. It's so easy.
Yeah, but if I ran a company like Patreon,
that's the marketplace of ideas thing. And here's
you would. Of course you would, because it's a business. Because it's a business, and I agree with you. But that's not a durable strategy. But as soon as they've dumped enough money to make it so that enough PragerU videos have been taken literally by enough people that even saying the word socialism is going to lead to, China, a cultural revolution that's going to kill people. You as a business will go away from any controversy. You as a business, until the backlash to what happened to Sam became so unbelievably overwhelming, your first instinct would be, you know what? I don't understand all of this. It's too complicated. I get that, this guy is of uncredible source, but the tweet's controversial. You know what? I don't want to deal with it. That's what businesses do.
So sometime back in the 1930s, Sam Seder sarcastically tweeted out this. And, you fast forward about 143 billion years later, and Mike Cernovich, who was apparently out hunting for Wethkowy Wibble progressives, dug up that tweet, used it to contact the execs over, in one way or another, over at MSNBC, framing it as Sam Seder is defending rape and child molestation, and it being presented framed in that way, MSNBC said, "Oh wow," and fired Sam Seder. And then instantly, because he's like a part-time contributor to MSNBC, he goes on Chris Hayes all the time, and kind of look like each other and stuff. And then, but there was a huge backlash from a lot of supporters and just all kinds of people from the community, whatever. And because it was obviously a ridiculous fucking lie. That he was in any way supporting anything like that. His job was restored in MSNBC, and Sam Seder won all kinds of new subs and whatever, and Mike Cernovich was humiliated.
But someone with a smaller platform could have been destroyed by that.
Dude, if someone, there is no doubt that somebody with a smaller platform would have been destroyed by that. Most people, if that happened to somebody with a smaller platform, they would not have every single entertainment figure and pundit.
If it happened to somebody who hadn't been platforming a lot of different journalists at a lot of different major publications,
100%, 100%. So as long as we're in the market game, it's not a smart play.
I guess
that's my view.
The point.
Can I say what I think about this too? Sure.
With the monopolization thing, I'm saying, like, if we weren't in this context of monopolization and I was just running a Patreon, I would still kick off Sargon for explicitly his political beliefs, and I wouldn't run somebody who speaks like that.
But you would be setting a different company up, which is what we're talking about. Which is like, I want my Patreon is committed to socialist, anarchist, cool content.
Exactly.
You're some weird, fucking bigoted idiot from Britain. No, thank you.
So you talk about monopolization.
Yeah,
instead, right?
Sure. And that's the monopolization and innovation. Right. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with some of what you guys have said and disagree with other parts of it. I do think it speaks to the need for real left-wing platforms, because I also do not trust Patreon or any evil tech company really to adjudicate these things. I also agree that we need to pick our battles and be smart about it and know where to draw the line between a real fascist who poses either clear and present danger to people or like just spreading a violent ideology that leads very directly to violence, like we've seen with the Proud Boys, who have actually put people in the hospital fairly recently, and know when you're just playing into people's hands and when you're not. But like, okay, I used to be much more of a free speech absolutist than I am right now. But over time, like as I've gotten more and more information about this stuff, I've kind of changed my mind. Because first of all, like if you provide a neutral platform, we're not on equal footing in the marketplace of ideas, right? Some ideas have a lot more money and power behind them than others. So if I don't think any platform is truly going to be neutral, and I do think they have the responsibility to at least try to be smart about who they're featuring and who they're not. And like, we got to use all the tools in our toolbox, And I used to think that deplatforming and protesting people was pointless because it didn't work. But I've seen it work a bunch of times. Like, it really hurt Alex Jones. It really hurt Mike Cernovich, Gavin McInnes. Like, they're pissed off about it. And fewer people are being polluted with their white nationalist garbage as a result. Also, there's no rule, there's no law that says the right and the left have to be treated equally, right? So like the slippery slope argument where, oh, it would be so easy once you set this precedent to use it against the left, that there's no equivalence there.
But which side's capital?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about more. I'm talking in terms of power. Obviously, it's going to be used against the left. I mean, it already is. And in fact, a more practical. Just to add to this, because we always talk about like the easy ones, okay? But on Facebook, in response to a lot of pushes on these issues, okay, Alex Jones, Gavin McInnes, massive impacts on websites like Brazil Wire. The Atlantic Council, which is a center-right to neocon think tank, is advising Facebook on Latin America content and on foreign policy. And it's already had a massive impact on independent adversarial journalism on U.S. foreign policy. And there is absolutely, not only is it going to favor the right in terms of where capitals will go, it is, I mean, that's not even slippery slope. It already is, barring a couple of top line personalities that we all focus on. The structural creep of what already is getting flattened and moved out of the discourse is on the left. And that's for obvious reasons that, of course, capital will favor the right. So I just think, like, look, it's both a bad play because of the context we're in. And I also think we shouldn't lose sight too of, the other facets of this as well, which is that like these people can be out and we can defeat them and beat them, and we don't have to kind of play that cop hall monitor role.
Here's the thing though. They're going to do that to the left no matter what the left does
I don't
to the
know.
right.
I don't know about that.
They are.
Well,
they do and they will.
But what's the evidence for that? Like, we have actual evidence of how these things are working. We need to respond to like what the actual evidence is versus like you could be right, but that's not what the reality is now. So the reality, I feel like
you don't think that they would keep trying to deplatform It's Going Down if the left stopped trying to deplatform Gavin McInnes. I think they absolutely would.
I think it's possible.
And one thing
but
about
the
right
what is
that is smart is they use absolutely every tool in their toolbox, and they don't have conversations like this unless it's in a totally disingenuous way that only benefits themselves.
I guess the problem is you're sharpening the tools for them.
Right. You're giving them
I
a
don't
tool.
agree.
They have more tools. They have more advantages. And your hand, like, again, we don't operate in an idealized world. I'm having the conversation as if it's already baked in that they have structural advantages.
I think
that's a given.
I think they invented this and the left has picked it up, because the vast majority of instances where people have been harassed, deplatformed, forced to leave their jobs, it's been for expressing left-wing views.
I mean, my worry and I think the examples of Sargon and Gavin and Milo being deplatformed, like, I think it has damaged their careers and probably minimized their ability to damage society. But I worry that the availability of those case studies is overshadowing things like the Crimes of Britain accounts that get shut down, or the Telesur getting
the Telesur. I mean, it's the classic, like, the headlines tell, like, look at these companies, they're cracking down on the alt-right, but the structural instruments that are being put into place, from the Google algorithm searches to Facebook, certainly Twitter accounts. In fact, Twitter accounts still are, there's satiric left-wing personalities that have been banned, and Richard Spencer is still on. So the top line is that even in this, like, it's already being lost on the left. So maybe the most practical answer is, and, like, there's conversations that people are having about this that maybe will come out down the road, is really just being like, there needs to be, at least on, like, the Patreon level, some type of explicitly left platform.
Absolutely.
I
agree with that too. And here's
stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
And if you have these sort of different, Patreon sort of services or personal services, they're not normalized by being on the same platform as everybody else. So it's like, oh, come on, this was how Milo got as far as he did. It's like, oh, he's just, he's not that bad. And look, he's on this thing and he's talking on that thing and he's on. We're sharing this space with them. If people have to go to the place that says, like, in their mission statement, we're totally good with neo-Nazis and liars, then people know that going on.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And I also just want to say, too, that another reason that Milo got really punctured was because of also just like that BuzzFeed report on Milo is, I mean, there was the comment that people dug up, the pedophilia thing, which I don't remember, but that was one. And to be honest with you, my read on that was that he was already on the way out anyways.
That was a Dean scream.
Yeah, they would have run interference for him, because that's exactly the type of comment that he would make and say, like, ooh, I was just joking, get away with. So I don't know about that. But the BuzzFeed report that actually was like, all right, this isn't speculative. Like, this is the pipeline. This is the piece in Breitbart. This is how they would advise, like, actual active white nationalists. This is how it gets reframed and laundered for, that was devastating, because it shut down a whole spectrum of the conduit bullshit conversations from people like Dave Rubin, who'd be like, oh, just ideas. And then it was like, okay, this is the actual idea process. And that was, frankly just journalism and analysis. I think that really pinned them.
And it destroyed their entire sort of finely tuned dog whistle narrative.
Exactly.
That was so careful to not be racist and fascist and bigoted. But, you just scrape the surface a little bit and it just ripped the whole thing off. And it had, a total ripple effect, because now we can apply that rubric to other people. Look, his rhetoric is exactly the same things that Milo was saying. So obviously he's, that's what Sargon's whole shtick. He was recently, I heard him on a Kevin Logan podcast, and they ripped him apart, calling him names, tore his argument apart repeatedly, and were totally disrespectful to him. Nice. It was really fun.
Sounds like other people are following my lead to how to debate.
Well, sure. Well, but he came away from it like he took all the jabs, all the gender-specific name-calling at him and all this stuff, and came away like, I can take it because I'm in the marketplace of ideas. So it was like, it was fun to watch him just get ripped apart, but he just laughed it off.
Right.
And so that's, again, where that BuzzFeed article is so important, because he's not an honest actor. Sargon isn't debating issues. Give me a fucking break.
100%.
I'll use this issue to sell
100%.
this other lie.
And for what it's worth, and this is where it's the last thing I'll say, I think where there's value in defending like the actual liberal bougie values that anybody who I think is just even contextually honest, like if you're, you know, in your early 30s in the United States of America, even in a radically changed political situation, you're going to want to preserve some of these things that we call bourgeois or whatever the hell. And frankly, I think for what it's worth, the Milo case is actually an example of the most potent thing that really destroyed him was aggressive, smart, First Amendment-enabled investigative journalism. And that's when he was totally destroyed. That was when the book company dropped his book, and now he's a joke. So great.
I don't know. I feel like these
for the call, man.
These liberal media platforms who still think that they can be neutral and provide an equal amount of time to these people, they need to wake up, because throughout history, we've seen fascists do not respect their liberal values, and they're going to use any platform they're given against them.
No doubt. Richard Spencer, we played a clip of him a year and a half ago. He said, we'll use it, and then when we get in power, we get rid of the First Amendment.
Yeah. So absolutely. Like, he doesn't care about free speech.
Of course
and
not.
I realized...
I do.
Yeah. And I realized that most of these companies are more likely to break for the right than the left when push comes to shove, but they should be a little smarter than that about it, because the fascists are not on their side.
Okay, so that's what I would call a proper macro critique of the issue, employing a Marxist analysis of capitalism and understanding capitalism's role in the issue at hand. I'd say that essentially everybody involved in that conversation is somewhere on the socialist stripe, or at the very least has a good, strong understanding of Marx's critique of capitalism. And while that conversation didn't sound like some big, long explanation of why capitalism is bad, the reason we were able to hit on so many different points from so many different perspectives is because all of us were applying that broad macro understanding of capitalism's role in this issue. Because, I mean, ultimately, fascism is the strong-arm defense mechanism of capitalism in crisis. That's why all these people are popping up out of the woodworks, the Steven Crowders and, you know, Gavin and Sargon and all these people. And why anti-fascists such as myself are very keen to want to see them shut the fuck up, because they're spreading blatant lies. Now, that doesn't mean that you should just go off half-cocked willy-nilly and just start, you know, doing anything and everything you can to stop them without understanding and really taking the time to suss out what might be the blowback or the cursory or, you know, supplementary, whatever sort of result of these types of actions. I just think that was a really, really great conversation. There's a couple things that, you know, that I'll sort of touch back on and clarify maybe in the conclusion of this part one. But I want to show you sort of the other way to go at a conversation like this. Now, I'm going to show you two separate clips, and neither one of these are about deplatforming. But what you're going to see is people on the different sort of spectrum from liberal to progressive to, of course, then socialist in that evolution. But what you're going to see is that because liberals who are capitalists have no understanding of capitalism's role in the macro scenario of tying together so many maybe seemingly disparate aspects of our society and our culture, that if you apply that rubric of the Marxist analysis to your critique of those things, you'll see that a lot more things make more sense, or you're able to at least at the very least understand them better. And so what we're going to see here in this first clip is is Whoopi Goldberg freaking the fuck out because of the existence of Justice Democrats. Now, Justice Democrats is a thing that was started by Kyle Kulinski and Cenk Uygur from Young Turks, and really the premise is, one, they're going to put support candidates, progressive candidates that are running on this sort of Bernie Ocasio-Cortez social democrat platform, but one, primarily they will not take any type of PAC money, and then of course they're in line with Medicare for all and dealing with student debt and these kind of things, right? And you'll see that, and then the other side of it is that they're really into primarying, going after establishment Democrats that are backed by big giant corporations and shit in their primaries, and trying to get real progressives into Washington. And you'll see, again, like I said, that Whoopi really freaks out about the whole thing, and I'm going to come back and I'll explain why that's relevant to this conversation. So check it out, and then we'll be right back.
Reportedly, some of the newly elected female Democrats are part of a so-called pink wave who are questioning whether Nancy Pelosi should be Speaker of the House. They say, she's too old, she should step aside and let the new folks. So, okay.
Yeah.
If you're going to be the new folks, you also need to do your homework. Let's take it, for example, a Nancy Pelosi or a Dianne Feinstein. Two women battling and still at work. Right. Battling their male counterparts on both sides, okay? Nancy Pelosi got most of that Obama bill through. She fought the Obamacare. Obamacare. Right. She has been on the side of right for most of the time she's been in. The same with Dianne Feinstein, and the same with a whole bunch of these folks who have gotten older. You know what aged them? Fighting for the right to be an American 100%. Yeah. So if you're going to represent us, because a lot of folks got in, and some of y'all calling yourselves, what was it? It's something crazy. Not crazy, but it really kind of freaked me out. Justice Democrats. So I know, so let me just be really clear, because you kind of, on your site, you kind of take a little punch at people. So my question is this, are you saying that other Democrats who've been fighting for 25, 30 years aren't Justice Democrats? You think that, I don't know, let's name a couple of people who've been fighting. John Conyers, who's not there anymore, and Lawyer. Yeah, I mean, you need the experience. You need experience to handle all this stuff. And if you don't have it, sit back and learn some stuff and then take over. But you can't come in and pee all over everything and say it's done. Well, you can't do that.
But there are a lot of Democrats, 17 Democrats, some incumbents, some coming in. The people are saying she may not even have the votes among her own caucus.
That's okay.
Can I tell you something?
Does she have the votes?
She's got the votes, and she's going to be the next speaker. I frankly think it's healthy to have these type of challenges. I think this is a democratic vote.
Yes.
Nobody's appointed. It's not a monarchy.
But then
let her earn their support.
But then don't do what you are pissed at other people for doing. Don't be sexist. Don't be ageist.
You mean the Democrats that are coming out against her?
Because these folks have been working their behinds off to make sure of the same things you want to fight for.
But the woman who wants to, one of the women who's challenging her is a 60-something-year-old woman. It's not really about her age.
No, but as I said, if you're reading the Justice Democrats thing, and they're talking about gathering all these people to get rid of the old guard.
Yeah.
Who have not been fighting for the justice. They've been paying money, getting money for the big. It's like, who are you talking about?
Okay, so why I think she's so upset is not, obviously she doesn't understand what Justice Democrats is. She was fumbling to even say the name of the word. All she knew is they were going after establishment Democrats. Now, does that make Whoopi the establishment, like she sits around and just thinks, wow, how can I be more establishment? No. I think what it is that she has been so put on the back foot, like all of us have been, whether you're liberal, progressive, socialist, communist, anarchist, whatever, on the back foot of right-wing narratives and right-wing attacks against literally everything we stand for and striving for, that we're in that perpetual defense mode. And, you know, this is the Obama administration in a nutshell, is that the right wing just bombarded everybody with such immense fucking lies about his record that you were on the left having to sort of sparse out like, no, that's wrong, and that's wrong. And then people like us who are real socialists and anarchists and communists and whatever hated that because we were disgusted by a lot of things that Obama did. But we were put in this position of like, okay, do we defend him against the lies of the right? How do we defend him and then go at him for the things he actually really does? Now, liberals and progressives are much better than this, but liberals are they just get caught up in that next headline, that next big story of, okay, there's this attack on Obama or there's this attack on Nancy Pelosi, and it's a lie because it's coming from the right, and they always lie. Literally, it's 2018. Let's get fucking real. Maybe it didn't used to be that way, but it is now. And anything coming out of Washington from the right winger is a fucking lie, or based on a lie premise. So each one of those lies, rather than applying a macro understanding of why they're lying and what they choose to gain from lying, they're like reeling from it. They must be crazy, and that's when all this ableist language comes in. Oh man, you know, Trump's off the rails. He's a lunatic. He's nuts. He's fucking crazy. No, he's doing what fucking capitalists do, and if you understood capitalism's role in literally every aspect of our society, you wouldn't make these mistakes. And now I want to show you one more clip that I think is even more dangerous. Now again, it's not about the deplatforming topic, but it gets to the same notion that I'm describing from the Whoopi clip. So let's take a look at this, and then I'll be back.
So let's talk about some of the progressive groups like the Movement for Black Lives. The coalition of more than 150 Black-led organizations has come out against the First Step Act. They wrote a statement, quote, "This bill is custom-made for rich white men. All the carve-outs make the vast majority of our people ineligible for the benefits of the bill. Moreover, by mandating post-release surveillance, the bill opens the door to increased privatization while causing additional harm to the most marginalized of our people. We believe all of this will be done while giving liberal cover to the Trump administration as they attack, cage, and warehouse Black, brown, and working-class people across the country." The Movement for Black Lives also points out the bill explicitly excludes immigrants from access to early release and rehab programs and will direct money saved from early releases to go back into law enforcement. They say the bill encourages profiteering and makes false promises about bringing Black prisoners home. Your thoughts?
So I just wanted to jump in and correct some of that misinformation, because I just don't want to have viewers listening and thinking that that is true, and it's just not. I've seen the numbers. The U.S. Sentencing Commission actually did an analysis, and the exclusions actually are pretty much across the board for white, Black, and Hispanic individuals. Those exclusions are for a small part of the bill, the time credits that people can earn by doing programming. There are plenty of pieces of the bill that do apply to everybody who's inside of the prison, regardless of what crime they committed, including the increased good time credit that people can earn off of their sentence for good behavior. I also want to point to the crack cocaine retroactivity. That disproportionately is going to impact African Americans who are inside. There are going to be a lot more African Americans coming home in this first batch of individuals who are coming home than any other race, and that is because people fought very, very hard, Dick Durbin in particular, to make sure that nothing went forward that didn't include a massive fix of retroactivity on the Fair Sentencing Act, which had been passed almost a decade ago. So I just want to correct some of that misinformation. On the immigrants piece also, you know, I'm sorry we couldn't get away with getting rid of the current ban on people who are here undocumented going to halfway houses. We tried, we pushed, we were unable to get away from it, but it is just a continuation of the status quo. So I just wanted to address those couple points and invite people to look at firststepact.org if they want to check out all the wonderful things that are in this bill.
And how you extend this beyond federal prisoners. This deals with 10%, right? 200,000 prisoners in federal prison. What about now the model being for all prisoners? What's your next step, Jessica?
Well, you know, we're already getting calls from state legislators across the country asking us, can we do this in my state? What can we do in my state? And not just Democratic state legislators, both sides of the aisle now feel comfortable. They're seeing there was a clear mandate by Congress, 87 to 12. 358 to 35. I mean, just a mandate. And every single one of the amendments meant to be poison pills slapped down. So they're wanting to get going in their own states. This really has made an impact on the narrative, and I think we're going to see a lot of trickle-down justice coming from this bill.
Okay, as you saw, she didn't address a single point raised by the Movement for Black Lives. Instead, she went into all of her talking points against right-wing critique. Because there were some really serious issues raised by the Movement for Black Lives. Like, for instance, post-release surveillance. Now, that's all of those services, you know, the anklets, or whether it's you know, breathalyzer in your house, or there's all kinds of different things that are involved in post-release surveillance. And all of it is run by private companies who, incidentally, have a hell of a lot to profit from you fucking up while you're on those types of services. Because if you start out with just the base level and you fuck up, the next thing is, okay, we're going to intensify these services and we're going to add this thing to it. And then if you keep fucking up, whether, you know, whatever it is, if you used or you stepped outside the house at the wrong time and got violated, or you didn't go to the meeting they were making you go to, or whatever it is, what happens is you end up basically, you go back to jail. And then all the time that you already did on post-release surveillance, that's not like you serve that time. That all starts over again. And so that company gets to make all that money again when you get released out of jail and it starts over again. So, I think that Movement for Black Lives is very astute to point out the carve-out for post-release surveillance. You know, and on a less significant point, I think that that woman does a disservice to herself and to her own bill by discounting the very real reality that Trump will use this as his favor, and exactly the way Movement for Black Lives described. Now, that doesn't discount the bill, and that doesn't discount the efforts and the good things that there are in this bill, because from what I can tell, there are some very cool things in this bill, okay? But just out of hand disregarding that type of narrative will exist and not having a response to it, that's a fucking problem. Instead of just being all defensive, say, I don't know, like, okay, we're very interested in listening to what the Movement for Black Lives has to say, because, I don't know, they're representing the people that are actually going to be directly affected and or left behind by this bill. So that's why there's such hard-hitting truth to what Movement for Black Lives is espousing, is because they're not coming at you from a right-wing narrative just trying to destroy you and look out for big business. They're actually looking at the people that are going to be directly affected by this and asking some very fucking important questions. And again, another important question that they're asking is that this money that would be saved from early release, because let's make no mistake, being an enslaved person in a prison is profit for some type of company somewhere. And that's money coming in. So they're saying we'll reallocate that funds to more police. More police means more people in jail. More people in jail means more people getting on this post-release surveillance stuff. Okay, so these are very, very legitimate issues. So instead of reacting and get on the defensive and fucking accusing the Movement of Black Lives of spreading misinformation, are you seriously fucking kidding me? Get your shit in check. What you should be saying is, yes, there's some real value to these issues that Movement for Black Lives is raising. We would like to meet with them. We'd like to do our best to mitigate these negative possibilities in future manifestations of this bill, because as you heard her say, that they want to see this spread to other states. So, okay, and so now go to those other states and say, hey, we sat down with these people who had some very serious concerns with the original version of this bill, and we felt they were right on this point and on that point, and we think if you're going to implement this in, you know, Ohio or Missouri or whatever, maybe have this carve out instead, or maybe remove that stipulation and make this really, really, truly something positive for already suffering, marginalized, and really fucking poor people, okay? But no, you want to argue against a bunch of right-wing talking points because you're not understanding the macro fucking situation that you're dealing with. That one, there are, see, look, here it is. Liberals are really bad about this. Progressives, not so much. Progressives are a little better about it. But it's like, liberals don't understand that there's a whole mass of people that are further to the left of them. And, you know, I would argue that the further left you get, the more educated you've become, and thus your analysis becomes better. But they disregard that we even exist and have patted themselves on the back as being the most, you know, extremist, getting the shit done possibility, you know, people possible. And this gets it back to the stuff that, about why I put the Whoopi clip in, is because you're arguing against the wrong thing. You're so in perpetual, okay, how are we going to get right-wingers on this? How are we going to convince the right wing? How are we going to get past this right-wing lie and that right-wing lie? Been so like in that mode for so long, when an actual leftist who truly cares about this issue comes and says, hey, looks like you did some good stuff, but there's a problem here. And instead of taking it all personal, because yeah, you probably did mean to do a good fucking thing, but you're missing the macro fucking perspective and arguing against right wing. And if there isn't any other fucking better example of it, is she culminates in calling it trickle down justice. Seriously, give me a fucking break. That's not going to play with leftists, because the last thing called trickle down something was devastating to poor communities. It didn't trickle down. Okay, that was trickle down economics. Now, saying trickle down justice might be a good little jab and snarky thing that plays well when you're sitting in a room with a bunch of fucking rich Republicans, you know, and you might make them go, feel kind of shitty, and that might work really well with them. But that's not who you're fucking arguing against. And you have let a lot of very, very important, crucial critiques of your bill go unaddressed and unfleshed out, and in the process, completely threw the movement for Black Lives under the bus by calling them, by accusing them of spreading misinformation. Okay, so we were all over the place, right? But the overarching point is the right wing is setting the tone of the narratives. We can't get things done on the left if we're having to constantly mobilize by the thousands to shut down fascist rallies. We're not getting things done on the left, and our analysis isn't growing and evolving if we're perpetually answering to right-wing lies. And if we're having to undo the lies of the right wing, we're not focused on pushing forward the things that we would actually support and that are good for the masses of people, as opposed to a handful of fucking corporations, right? So that's why I want to point out the importance against not arguing from a faulty premise. So if you're arguing against the lies of the right, as opposed to addressing the true concerns of the left, the whole conversation is just a fucking mess. And meanwhile, the right is who is dictating that whole fucking shit show. And again, that's another reason why it's important not only to understand the macro dynamic that you are arguing against or debating against or trying to get things done in the midst of, if your own personal rhetoric and language isn't that much more on point, it leaves you open to all kinds of other criticisms. If you're throwing people under the bus that are righteous, hardworking, decent, poor-ass, fucking oppressed people in the process of trying to help said people, it falls on some really deaf and resentful ears. And that's not their fault. That's the problem in your messaging. But here's the thing. I think this is the distinction between the right-wing narratives that I'm framing within this video and left-wing narratives. And I tried to illustrate this a little bit in my conversation with the MR crew, is the distinction of the lie. It's that the reason Sargon was pulled down and because of, and you know, and a lot of other people, is because, yes, they did espouse racist terms and terminology and ideas, but it's all to sell in a dishonest way authoritarian pro-capitalism fascism. And so it's not just that they said the N-word or used ableist language and that really sucks. See, that can't be just the basic rubric we use to determine whether someone should be deplatformed, is they said a word. It has to be the premise and the notion behind it. And with these far-right people, it's that they're using all these language and all these various issues dishonestly. They're using the marketplace of ideas in order to ultimately pervert the marketplace of ideas. Now, when I say I want to illustrate a little more about why I think this distinction of the right wing being deplatformed for actual lies, as opposed to like it's going down on the left being deplatformed for lies told about them, is we at Punks for Progress have had actually a few videos in our 3 or so years on YouTube that got piled on by right wingers who complained about it, and they got pulled down. Now we contested and ultimately did have these videos restored, except for one, which to this day I do not know why it was taken down. It's a what the fuck report. It's taken down for hate speech. I've never been shown at what portion of it is, but anyway, it's still down. But the other times that this has happened, we were able to contest it and get the video restored. So there is some level of importance to making that distinction of like, the reason our videos were restored is because people had lied about us. The things that they tried to say was in our content was not true. We weren't doing whatever it was they were accusing us of doing. But this does get to Michael's broader point about putting your trust in some fucking corporation, which I am not about to do. And he's very astute to point out that ultimately that's what I would be relying on. So I still think we can keep both things in mind. That yes, there is a level of importance. You can't just disregard any notion of, well, they lied so it doesn't matter, and I told the truth so it doesn't matter just because it's owned by a corporation. There is some leverage to be had there, and our videos that are currently restored are proof of that. But at the same time, you don't want to ultimately that be the only thing that you're relying on, because we still have one that's down, and I can assure you we did not engage in hate speech. But here, I think that this actually gets to what Jamie was trying to point out, was that the left is already deplatformed. I mean, the mainstream media is centrist, pro-corporate, right, if not far right, and no true leftist. I mean, we're TYT and Kyle Kalinske and stuff are struggling like fucking with everything they have to get inklings of just a progressive voice heard in those mainstream media. So the left is already deplatformed, and the right does have all the fucking tools. You know, Matt mentioned that we're sharpening the tools for the right, and I disagree with that too, because again, they have all the tools. I see us more as raiding their armory and raiding their storehouses and taking little scraps of what we can of their tools to stop the proliferation of these lies that have real-time effects on the minds of so many people. This gets to, again, another part of what Matt said about how wanting the monopolization of these formats. That is a serious fucking problem, and I agree with them on that. Because the MR crew, this is actually what I thought when I called that Michael would ultimately flesh out was they've talked a lot on the Majority Report about sort of nationalizing social media platforms and then applying literal constitutional First Amendment and et cetera, to these platforms. And I was kind of hoping to hear that fleshed out a little bit more, and they didn't really get into it. But in a way they did, because obviously they've put some time into the concept of different funding platforms to sort of break up that monopolization that things like Patreon have, right? Because they're saying, you know, keep your eyes out or whatever, that we're going to see it sometime. So I am keeping my eyes out for that, and I'm really open to that. But I think that one of the things that I think society, and this is when I'll really start to wrap it up, is I think that society needs to get very real with these questions, because I think we've decided that things like fuck and shit and piss, like, who cares about words like that? But there's other words like bitch that are problematic and have a history of being used to oppress people. Okay, fuck is actually a word that's been used to emancipate people. Hence, people trying to squash words like that. But all of this gets to the idea that, okay, like, what is acceptable in our community? And I think that this point that I've tried to hammer, I don't know how well I've done it, but I've repeated it over and over. The distinction, the dividing line is the lies. And it's not just lies, it's what's the purpose of the lie. And what we're seeing from the far right, which is real fascism, is that they are using the marketplace of ideas to sell lies that bolster oppressive capitalist fascism. And if we can get all the liberals on board that, like, yes, it sucks when they use racist terminology, but that's not the major problem. It's their underlying ideology behind the terminology that's the problem, and we're not addressing that because we're just going at it from this headline to the next headline to the next headline. And meanwhile, these fascists are all over our virtual online town square, spreading weaponized lies. Lies that turn already disenfranchised, already very angry, already just immensely resentful, while at the same time incredibly ignorant, as a direct result of the complete dismantling of our education system over decades. But all these lies have the effect of weaponizing all these people and turning them into fucking pipe bombers, or vigilante synagogue shooters, or you know, people who go out and just randomly shoot a black person because they've heard so much rhetoric and lies about Black Lives Matter that they think standing up for Black lives is a terrorist act. So it's not just that they said the N-word. It's that these lies create rampant violence that does result in murder. All right, so here's the thing, and it's what Jamie was trying to speak to, is that essentially the left already is deplatformed. You will not hear any true far-left, socialist, anti-capitalist voices in any mainstream outlet anywhere. All of the mainstream outlet is at best centrist, but in most cases far-right voices that are dominating. And all we have left is this sort of YouTube or online sphere. You know, we have this, you know, online community space. This is what we have. And I don't think we need to be sharing it with people whose sole purpose is to pervert this communal space in order to sell weaponized lies that result in the murder and devastation of others.
This is not classroom theory. I saw it happen. I saw it first in Berlin in 1932. 5 young men that I knew were standing in the crowd listening to the Nazi speaker. Eric was a Catholic. Anton, a student of mine, was a Jew. Heinrich owned a small hardware store. Karl was a farmer. And Hans was an unemployed metal worker.
To all Aryan Germans,
I say it is time you inherited the nation which rightfully belongs to you. To you alone belongs the glorious destiny of the Greater Germany. The Nazi Party will provide land for the farmer, work for the worker, and profits for the small businessman. Who is getting these things now? The Jew. The Jew who has stolen our nation and our birthright. Who makes all the money and takes all our jobs? The Jew! He must be shunned. He must be ostracized. He must be eliminated. And the Catholics. We don't want our great nation run by a foreign church. We Germans will know what to do with these people when the time comes. They and their faith must be destroyed. Then there are the Freemasons. In Germany, we have no place for secret societies. There will be only one society, and that is the Nazi Party. There will be no secrecy about that in the new Greater Germany. One by one, he attacked each minority and he split them off one from the other. These men were all fellow Germans when they came here today. Now they were split into rival groups, suspicious of each other, hating each other. They were being swindled, all of them. But the man who was really being fooled was Hans. He was pure German, according to Nazi standards. To him they promised everything, and he fell for it. That's how Hans became a Superman. They gave him a uniform and they pumped up his ego. He wasn't just a little fellow out of work anymore. He was a member of the master race.